Good morning, everyone. My name is Councillor Smith and I am the chair of this committee. I'd like to welcome you to the Joint Development Control Committee meeting taking place at 10 a.m. on Wednesday the 20th of July 2022. And the members of the committee are Councillors Bagent, Colling, Page-Croft, Pora, Thornborough, Hahn, Fane, John Williams, and not least of all, Richard Williams, thank you. Agenda item 1, apologies. Apologies have been received from City Councillors Fobart and Scutt and South Cambs Councillors Bradnam and Hawkins. City Councillors Bagent and Page-Croft and South Cambs Councillor John Williams are attending as alternates in the chamber. South Cambs Councillor Stobart is due to join the meeting online. Whilst he can join in with the debate, he'll be unable to vote. We have a quorum, more than three members for each authority. As apologies have been received from the committee's vice chair, please could we elect a vice chair for this meeting only. This should be a South Cambs councillor in order to maintain political balance for decisions made in accordance with the conventions of the Joint Committee. I wish to propose Councillor John Williams. Could we have a seconder, please? Councillor Payne, thank you so much. All those in favour? That's unanimous, thank you. The officers permanently at the table for this meeting are Strategic Sites Delivery Manager Philippa Kelly, Legal Advisor for Keith Barber, and welcome to the top table, Keith Barber. After 35 years in local government service, it's time. Committee Manager Claire Tunnicliffe and Producer Boris Herzog. Other officers and public speakers will join us throughout the course of the meeting, and I'll introduce them at the start of the relevant agenda items. There are now some housekeeping matters. Copies of the agenda can be found in the City Council's website under the committee meetings, minutes and agendas. Please try and refer to page and paragraph numbers within the agenda if you're referring to a specific paragraph or plan. Please ensure that you've switched off or silenced any other devices so you do not interrupt the proceedings. When you're invited to address the meeting, please make sure your microphone is switched on. When you finish addressing the meeting, please turn off your microphone immediately. Speak slowly and clearly, and please do not talk over or interrupt anyone. Please, can those present in the council chamber note, everything on your desk, including your laptop screen, may be broadcast at some point. The camera follows the microphone being switched on, so councillors and officers requested to wait a couple of seconds before speaking to allow the camera to catch up. Please raise your hand if you wish to speak. Please can those participating in the meeting via the Teams meeting indicate that you wish to speak via the chat column or raised option. Claire will prompt me on this. Please do not use that chat column for any other purpose. The meeting chat is neither confidential nor private and becomes subject to an FOI or GDPR request. Make sure your device is fully charged and you switch your microphone off unless you're invited to speak. Please can meeting participants keep their microphone and cameras turned off until we come to the application we have registered for you to speak about. If a report officer drops out from the committee due to poor broadband signal, the senior officer present will take over their presentation, report and respond to questions. The process for each planning application will be as follows. The case officer will give a brief introduction to his/her report. Registered public speakers will be invited to have their say. There will be 3 minutes for those speaking in support and 3 minutes for those speaking against, unless I've advised otherwise. The committee manager will ring the bell when the 3-minute time period has passed. Public speakers are unable to join in with the councillor debate. The committee will then debate the item and may ask questions of the case officer. At the end of the deliberation, I will ask members to vote on the officer's recommendation by a show of hands. Moving on to agenda item 2. Could councillors advise if they have any declarations of interest and also identify which report their declaration relates to? Councillor Rich Williams.
My college, so I'll be withdrawing for that item.
Thank you very much, Councillor Williams. Councillor Carling.
Similar situation to Councillor Williams. I have an interest in item 4 as I'm an observer to the Board of Trustees of that college.
Thank you. And Councillor Bajent.
Yeah, I'm a member of Cambridge Cycling Campaign, Chair.
Very much. Standing item. Are there any other declarations of interest? Now proceed to agenda item 3, minutes of the meetings the 16th of March 2022 and 6th of April 2022, being submitted for this meeting for approval. It's been requested that the minute references and the declarations of interest of the 16th of March minutes are amended to the year 2022 rather than 21. Are there any further concerns or can they be approved? Yeah, Councillor Stobart.
Under declarations of interest, yes, I'm also a member of Cambridge Cycling Campaign.
Matter of the minutes. Can they be approved? Okay, in that case, do I need to take a vote? By acclamation? Okay, thank you very much. We now move to agenda item 4. So, Councillors Williams and Carling, leave the room. Thank you. Is Chris Fry present?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Anyone else present who has registered to speak? Could the Principal Planner introduce this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my presentation. Just bear with me a second. Okay, hopefully everybody online can see that now. So my name's Charlotte Burton. I'm a Principal Planner in the Strategic Sites team, and I'm the Lead Case Officer for Pavilion Green 1. This application is for the parcel known as BDW2. Hopefully some of the members will be familiar with this parcel. It includes 323 dwellings with associated internal roads, car parking, landscaping, amenity and public open space. The reserved matters include access, appearance, landscape, layout and scale, and the application also includes the related partial discharge of conditions on the outline consent insofar as they relate to this reserved matters application. The application has been subject to a series of amendments since it was submitted in October 2021. The first set of amendments was submitted in February this year and included an amendment to the red line of the application site, and a full consultation was undertaken on those amendments. The second set of amendments was submitted in June this year, including several amendments to several plots to improve the amenity for the future occupants, which was subject to more limited consultation with the relevant technical officers. And I'll go through and explain those amendments. But overall, the recommendation for this reserved matters application is for approval. The scheme has been subject to extensive discussions between officers, including with the urban design team and landscape officers and the sustainability officer who supports the proposals. And I should mention at this stage that our sustainability officer, Emma Davies, is available on the call to answer any questions related to sustainability matters. And I'll just draw your attention at this stage also to the amendment sheet, where I've referenced one further representation that was received since the publication of this report. So just to give you the context, once again, try and get a pointer. Here you go. So this is the location plan, and outlined in blue, you may not be able to quite see that, but broadly following this outline is the Darwin Green 1 site allocation and outline consent. We've got Huntingdon Road on the western side, Easton Road on the eastern side, A14 beyond, and our north arrow in this instance is pointing here. BDW2 is a parcel in the southern corner of Darwin Green 1, and it's approximately 8.11 hectares, comprising the former sports fields of Christ's and Sydney Sussex colleges. It borders onto BDW1. If I just go back to the previous slide, I'll just explain the previous consents that have been granted on Darwin Green include BDW1 and the local centre. Here, access from Lawrence Weaver Road, and the parcel here, which is the BDW 5 and 6 parcel, which was recently granted consent. So back to BDW2, it adjoins BDW 1 parcel, and it also shares a number of boundaries with existing properties, including Howes Place, Huntingdon Road, Woodlark Road, and I'll point out Hoadley Road, which runs here, which is a cul-de-sac adjoining the site boundary, with number 1 Hoadley Road located here. And beyond, we have the school playing fields for the primary school to be located here. In this location is the Central Park within Darwin Green, and we have BDW3 Reserved Matters parcel to the east here. And also just a note, you may be familiar with the Windsor Road connection here. That's located just off-site here. These are some photographs of the site, showing its recent state. As you can see, mainly just left to grass and scrub at the moment. You can see some of the existing boundaries and existing hedges. Just to go back to the site plan and to point out a few more features, the site does exclude the existing sports pavilion building, which doesn't form part of this application. And it does include a link from Huntingdon Road, which, as part of the infrastructure reserve matters, has already been granted approval for cycle and pedestrian connection as part of the orbital cycle route. And a number of other roads within the site have also been granted reserved matters through the infrastructure consent, including the secondary road here and also the primary road. And you'll see how those have been incorporated into the current proposal. Consent, it was granted in December 2013 under the previous local plan, 2016, and that forms the context under which the current application is assessed. The outline consent was granted for 1,593 homes, so this would deliver 323 of those. And it approved a series of parameter plans, a design code, strategic conditions, and the Section 106 agreement. And I've talked about those throughout my report. The reserve matters proposals are generally compliant with the outline consent, including those parameter plans and the design code. And the proposals have evolved from the master plan showed within the design code, but they do conform to the established principles. And that development has been done in discussion with the urban design team throughout that process. Previous scheme, which was refused by the Joint Development Control Committee in December 2020. And there were 4 reasons for refusal, which I've highlighted there. So I've just tried to summarise those as the first one being the residential amenity of the future occupants in terms of the internal floor spaces and some of the external amenity spaces. Secondly was failure to provide acceptable supporting infrastructure, including access to public open space, play areas and adequate cycle provision. The third was the unacceptable impact on the residential amenity of neighbouring properties, in particular Grosvenor Court and Hoadley Road. And the fourth one was the failure to meet the adopted guidance on clustering of affordable homes. So following that decision, there was a pre-application member briefing done by the developers in April 2021, and we had an officer briefing in March earlier this year. And what I'll do in my presentation is I'll just explain how those reasons for refusal have been addressed. But here, just to show you the proposed site plan, we have the primary road coming down here, which is an extension of Falmouth Avenue, doing a dogleg and going out to BDW3. We've got secondary streets running through the site as well. I want to highlight the green spaces. So we have this area in the southern corner of the site referred to as Pavilion Green. We have a pocket park in this Muse area in the centre of the site. And we have what's referred to as the T Park here, which is a pedestrian and cycle-friendly area, and that extends down in this direction as well. To understand that site master plan, I've provided some of the strategic diagrams. So again, you can see here the hierarchy of the access roads with the primary access, the secondary access, tertiary streets, and these pedestrianised or pedestrian and cycle-friendly areas and some of the connections. And the diagrams below here, they may be a little bit small, but what they're trying to show really is how the site has been designed to provide pedestrian and cycle permeability, particularly from this southern corner with the orbital cycle route coming in, providing a range of routes for cyclists to weave their way through the site, including through this pedestrian and cycle-friendly link and up into the local centre and towards the central green space. And this diagram here is, again, in a similar way, just showing some of the key pedestrian routes, showing permeability through the site, a range of options for people to find the route that suits them. And in terms of starting to think about character, the building heights are conforming to the building heights parameter plan as amended through the non-material amendment. And so we have a range of 2- and 3-storey buildings with the higher buildings being located along that primary route and onto the T Park here and again around here. So really trying to create a hierarchy of routes and using some key buildings, some of the apartment blocks as well, changing materials to be able to create some legibility and a sense of place throughout the development. And as I said, the urban design team support the proposals and have been involved in how this has evolved. So I want to focus now, before going on to the buildings and what they look like, I want to show you some of the open spaces. So this is the Pavilion Green in the southern corner. Part of the important open space across Darwin Green. And what you can see here is it's been arranged with a local area of play within the middle. And it has a range of pedestrian and cycle routes, including some cycle parking for visitors, and incorporates drainage swales and planting as well. And there is a range of play equipment that has been provided. You'll note from the committee report that there are some ongoing discussions with the Streets and Open Spaces team about the detail of those play areas. So at this stage, and those details are controlled through a condition on the outline consent, and at this stage, the recommendation is not to approve those details, to allow those discussions to continue and allow, allow those comments from the Streets and Open Spaces team who will be adopting this space to be taken into consideration. And to look in a bit more detail at the T Park, this was one of the features that, as I said, was an evolution from the design code and really is a benefit compared to the master plan and showing how the developer has taken on board the urban design team's feedback. It doesn't allow vehicle access through. There are bollards here, but cyclists and pedestrians can weave their way through. And there is a local area of play within the middle here. and you'll see some planting and some trees, benches, and providing a nice place for families to come. Finally, this is the pocket park within the Mews area. And open spaces team. And during the course of the application, the area of soft planting and grass has been extended and the amount of hard standing space has been reduced. But these discussions are still ongoing as to the nature of the play equipment in that area with the Streets and Open Spaces team, and that will be subject to a further submission to discharge that condition. I think, again, what this pocket park is trying to do is show how the neighbourhood works and how play spaces and places for children and families to come out, particularly within this Mews area, have been designed into the scheme. This is the first allotment site. There are 3 allotment sites across Darwin Green. This is the first one that constructed, and the allotments already have consent under the Infrastructure Reserve Matters as an alternative proposals, and again has been discussed with the Streets and Open Spaces team. The way in which allotments are used has evolved since the Infrastructure Reserve Matters was granted. It was a 2014 application, so there's a lot more about community growing, community storage space, and how those allotments can be managed more sustainably going forward. Again, the detail of the exact layout and landscaping would be discussed through a further submission of the allotments condition, but it does provide for cycle parking, storage and a community building, and some raised beds and planters, etc. So the developers are working with the Streets and Open Spaces team on that proposal. The buildings and what they look like. I've got several street elevations to give you a flavour of how the 2- and 3-storey buildings would look and the character of those. So this is an elevation of one of the primary streets, and you'll see there's a range of link-attached buildings, semi-detached buildings, and then a few terraced townhouse forms as well, and how those work in the street scene with the apartment buildings. Some detached properties and some pairing of properties, a mixture of gables and I suppose a mix of roof forms here to try and provide some rhythm and some variety across the street scene. The developer has used a high number of housing types to create some variety and ensure that the house types are appropriate to their location. And these are some of the smaller properties, creating more of an intimate character to those tertiary and Mews areas. And just to highlight the linear park, which is the T Park area, how that's creating a frontage onto that area. These are some images that are taken from the design and access statement, just to try and bring it to life a little bit for you. So on to the 4 reasons for refusal and how those have been addressed. The first one, I have split these up slightly into kind of 1A, B, C. That's my way of splitting them up, just to help us kind of go through them. But the first one being the internal space standards. This table is showing the comparison between the previous refused application and the proposal. And essentially, the headline is that 100% of the dwellings are now meeting the nationally described space standards. And that's, I would say that that is marked because the outline consent doesn't require them to meet space standards. So they have positively addressed that reason for refusal and are now meeting space standards. And that's been achieved through a number of ways. Firstly, some of the smaller house types have been omitted. So the opal house type has been omitted. That was 13 square metres below standards. They're now no longer using that house type. Other house types have had the floor space increased, and I'll give you some examples of that here. For example, the Lockton house type, this was the refused floor plans, and you can see the proposal now has a larger floor space. The ground floor has been increased to create more living space within the ground floor, and what that's resulted in is a small extension to the ground floor living space, which is meeting space standards and providing a more livable environment. The other example I've given you here is the amber house type. So the house type which was used in the previous one was 51 square metres. The current proposal is to use all of the house types that are 70 square metres. And as you can see, it provides, it meets the standards and it provides more living space. And I think I would highlight in these floor spaces that they do include storage space within those. So here on the amber, we've got 2 stores on the first floor, and here on the Lockton, as examples, we've got stores as well. External space. Again, there have been some amendments that have addressed some of the smallest plots on the refused applications. That's been done by rearranging some of the plots. We do have 5 fewer dwellings on this current scheme compared to the previous application. So the applicant has made meaningful changes to address these reasons for refusals. One of the examples is the opal house type, which previously had roof terraces and courtyards, was considered last time to be not provide acceptable amenity space. That has no longer been used, and instead we have these house types which have their own private gardens. And that's just an illustration here. You can see the number of houses has reduced in that location as a result. Another example of that is within the Tea Park, the amber units. This was the refused scheme here with relatively small gardens. You'll see here they've got not only a larger internal floor space, but larger gardens here as well. And you can see 2 fewer dwellings. If I just go back to another example that we highlighted on the refused scheme, these are houses that were previously for affordable rent, and they had relatively shallow rear gardens here. These are the 3-storey terrace forms along the primary road. Previously had relatively shallow 5-metre gardens, which would have had enclosure and overshadowing. They have now been extended to approximately 7 metres. And that's been done by quite a rethink of how this area works, including relocating bin and bike stores, including losing one of the car parking spaces for one of the flats over the garages to internalise some of that, and also by pushing them further forward. So we now have much more generous gardens of 7 metres. Amendments that officers have secured during the course of the application. I just wanted to highlight them because they relate to some of the conditions that have been applied. This is the area close to this borders onto House Place, and this is BDW1 to the north. Officers were concerned really about the size of these gardens and the amount of amenity space for these 3-bedroom shared ownership properties, and also relatively short gardens to these larger homes here. And the applicant has listened to those concerns and has made changes. So one of those in this instance has been to relocate the bin and bike stores into the front of the property. And these are the only bike stores really that are to the front of the property. So the design of those will be something that we will look to control through the conditions. But that has really enlarged the amount of usable amenity space for those properties. And also significantly, in this instance, the developer changed the house type to a shallower house type, which then has a much more generous garden. So officers have been satisfied that those concerns have been addressed. And for example, in the original submission, these properties had relatively limited usable amenity space, mainly taken up with car parking spaces here. These were affordable homes as well, so would be occupied by families. The applicant has, we raised our concerns and made some suggestions as to how those could be improved. And essentially, it has involved reusing some of this amenity space for these smaller homes and using them to externalise some of the car parking and cycle parking, rearranging those dwellings, and they now have much more generous gardens for those family homes. And then one final example. There's a lot of detail in this presentation, apologies. But this is an example where officers were concerned about some of the separation distances between neighbouring properties with potential for overlooking, interlooking. So officers were concerned about views from the second and third stories of these properties into rear gardens. The applicant has moved these properties further forward and has suggested some blank first floor elevations, and that would be controlled through conditions 20 and 22 with replacement brickwork detailing to be secured through condition 15. And there was also concerns from officers about overlooking from first floor windows from these properties into the gardens over here. And the solution for that has been to discuss some alternative window designs for the first floor windows, and that will be secured through condition 16. So these are just examples really of where officers have worked with developers at quite a detailed level to scrutinise these proposals, and how the developer has listened to those, and we've come to solutions and controlled those through the conditions. So you can see the amount of work that's been done. House types which doesn't have amenity space, and that was the flats over garages. These are the only properties that don't have their own private amenity space. And these house types are used because of this as a solution to some of the particular site constraints. In particular, wanting to provide relatively low-level properties with blank first floor elevations to provide an end point to the gardens here, so they're not too overbearing and intrusive, but whilst also providing a frontage onto the mews area, so that there's a degree of overlooking frontage onto those areas. So these are two-bedroom properties, which is a correction to paragraph 15.7 in my report. They do have no external amenity space, but as I said, this is a response to some of the site constraints as to why this house type has been used. And I think I would have to go back to the outline consent, and there is no requirement for them to provide external amenity space. Under the previous 2006, it wasn't conditioned as part of outline consent. So that's why officers have felt that on balance, 4 out of 323 is acceptable. Space provision. And what I sought to do here is just provide the outline consent context. The outline consent includes a large central park in the middle of the site and open space through green corridors. And you'll see that the allotments, if I zoom in here, the allotments and the pavilion park, and then 2 areas of play spaces has been secured through the outline consent for this parcel. And the drawing on the right-hand side shows the applicant's compliance with that. This table really is looking at it in terms of areas. It's comparing the requirement from the previous slide with the proposal. So the first section here is including the pavilion space, the tea park, the pocket park, and some of the other incidental spaces. We've also got the play space through the leap and the 2 laps, and we've got the allotments. And what this is showing really is that the proposal is exceeding the requirements from the outline consent. And in addition to that, this parcel is in close proximity to the Central Park, with the connectivity that I showed you in the earlier diagrams in terms of pedestrian and cycle movements towards that. Of play spaces, and you will see that there is good, this is showing the radiuses from the local areas of play and the leap as well, showing that there's good coverage, so they're well distributed across the parcel. The applicant has provided 1,069 spaces, 92 of those are for visitors. Cycle parking for houses is predominantly within stores to the rear of the property. There's individual stores. I highlighted the few examples where there are stores to the front. For apartments, these are in external stores or incorporated into the ground floor. And there are 92 visitor spaces that are distributed across the site, including some within the Pavilion Green and some within the allotments, which does include some cargo spaces for the allotments as well, and that other key places throughout the development, including related to some of the apartment blocks. The different store types, showing how these meet the floor spaces. The stores that were previously below sizes on the refused application have now all been increased in size. The detail of the external appearance of the stores would be approved through a separate application to discharge the condition on the outline consent. And I also wanted to show you again the level of scrutiny that officers have given this in terms of making sure that there is acceptable width of access to get to those stores at the back to make sure that it functions well. One of the outcomes of that has been to look at these carports and to make sure that things like having external columns which restrict the width have been designed out so that we've got appropriate widths. On to car parking, we've got 509 spaces in total, and those are provided within, in accordance with the outline consent. For the homes, that is provided on plot. For the apartments, it's provided within small parking courts, and we have a number of visitor bays which are provided on street, or for instance, there's a few spaces provided on Pavilion Green as well, under the allotments. And I should just highlight that there was a travel plan that was secured through the outline consent, which includes measures such as a welcome pack for all new residents to give them information about some of the sustainable travel options. And there is also a condition on the outline consent requiring the provision of car club spaces, 5 in total, including 3 spaces at the local centre and 2 spaces within BBW 5 and 6. And I understand that those are in place and soon to be kind of actively used. So on to the third reason for refusal, which was the relationship with neighbouring properties. We're now on the eastern side of the parcel with the connection through to BDW 3, and this is number 1 Hoadley Road. This is showing the refused application, and you'll see that at that stage there was separation distance of 6 metres at its closest point, up to 8 metres here. That has been significantly increased to 13.5 metres and 11.5 metres here. That's been achieved through a realignment of this road. So you can see the road now continues in the same line as that road rather than kind of doglegging closer. These properties remain with blank first floor elevations, and that will be controlled through conditions, and I've also recommended a condition that would remove permitted development rights for extensions there as well. In terms of overlooking, overbearing, and overshadowing, officers are satisfied that unacceptable impact there. In terms of, the applicant has provided some visualizations to support the application, and what this is showing is really it's more of a street scene assessment rather than a residential amenity, but I thought I'd include it here. So this is just showing what those plots, plot 74 and 73 would look like from two locations, one towards the end of that cul-de-sac on Hoadley Road, and the second taken from a bit further back, actually on Woodlark Road itself. So as you can see, those roof forms would be visible, but they would really form part of the residential context of the area. On to Grosvenor's Court, previously refused due to the proximity of this property, which was slightly closer to the boundary here. That distance has been increased by changing the house type. So again, it's a shallower house type, similar to the other plots over here. And I have recommended a condition which would apply to all of those plots to remove the permitted development rights for extensions. The fourth reason for refusal was around affordable housing clusters. And this slide is showing you a comparison between the refused scheme and the proposed. So really, the scheme had clusters of 18 to 42 homes, which exceeded our adopted guidance. And on the right-hand side, we've got the proposed clusters, which are 3 to 22 homes, which is within the 25-home guidance. And I think this is one of the areas that the applicant, again, worked really hard on to address our policy requirements, but also in discussion with our joint housing strategy officer. The colours on here, the blue ones are private homes, the yellow and orange are the affordable tenures. So we've got a much more mixed development with market homes, but also within those clusters, we've got some good mixing between shared ownership and social rented properties. Just, so those were the four reasons for refusal, and I think you can see that officers have been satisfied with the work that the applicant has done. In terms of other benefits from this scheme, in terms of housing delivery, it's, as I said, 323 homes, 40% affordable, and an appropriate tenure mix between social rent and shared ownership. We've got a good range of dwelling sizes, creating a balanced and mixed community, and it's supported by the housing strategy team. The proposal is meeting the outline consent requirements to deliver 50 homes to lifetime home standards, including 20 affordable homes, and 47% of the dwellings would meet M42. There's not a requirement within the outline consent for the proposal to meet current policy requirements in terms of M43, and I think therefore it is the compliance with the condition requiring lifetime homes, which is what members should focus on here. In terms of sustainability, that's another area that the applicant has worked hard on. Due to the construction programme, 122 of the dwellings would be constructed to new building regulations, which exceeds the outline requirements to meet code level 4. And the applicant has agreed to a condition for that phasing strategy, and that's condition 11. There's also a recommendation for condition 12, which is future-proofing. The applicant is putting in a place for external heat pumps and the installation of appropriate pipework, etc. And thirdly, just electric vehicle charging points. One EV charging point will be installed for each dwelling, with an on-site parking space and 50% provision for EV charging points in communal areas, passive provision for the rest. So again, the applicant is going beyond the requirements of the outline consent there. And I think the final slide really is one of the benefits that I think addresses some of the concerns of residents the most. Certainly concerns regarding the ditch to the rear of Woodlark Road. There is a ditch that runs along this boundary with hedges as well. It is owned by the applicant, but residents have been concerned about the state of repair, both current and in future. This consent would secure a pre-commencement condition requiring the works to be carried out ahead of the development, and it also secures the ongoing maintenance. So while there have been other mechanisms through which residents can ensure that the maintenance is carried out, this would be another one for them to secure that maintenance going forward. And there is, during construction, there's also a bund that will be constructed to avoid overland flows into that ditch, and the detail of that will be controlled through condition 19. So finally, the recommendation is for approval of the reserved matters, subject to the conditions and informatives set out in the report, and with delegated authority to officers to carry out minor amendments to the conditions and informatives. The recommendation is also related to the discharge of conditions, and that is either to approve or not approve. My report, the wording is to not approve or not approve the partial discharge of the outline conditions as set out in my report. And those conditions which are not recommended for approval will require resubmission by the applicant at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. That's very good. So can I now take questions after the presentation by the applicant?
We'll have a break for a couple of minutes right now.
I should have appointed a lunch and break monitor for the purposes of this meeting. And we'll do that in future meetings. So thank you for exercising that role. Councillor Bages, let's have a break. Thank you. Oh, just forget this. Can we just have 5 minutes, please? Thank you. Please could Chris Fry, who's speaking in favour of the application, make his representations. I've exercised my discretion to permit you to speak for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members of the committee and the general public. Before I go into my speech, I'd just like to thank the officers for a very detailed presentation before you today, and apologise if I end up repeating some of what the officer has put across to you in a very detailed presentation. But by way of introduction, my name's Chris Fry, and I'm the Barratt Homes project planner responsible for delivery of Darwin Green 1. So as I said, my role is to briefly speak on behalf of Barratt Homes and support the application before you. Members will recall, of course, Parcel 2 at Darwin Green was previously refused by members of the Joint Development Control Committee in December 2020 for the 4 reasons that Charlotte has outlined in her presentation, namely the quality of the residential amenity of the future occupants of our houses, the inadequate infrastructure, so the open space and the play areas and the cycle parking, which Charlotte's gone through, the impact upon residential amenities, namely those in Grosvenor Court and Holy Road, and finally the 4th reason for refusal, that being the clustering of affordable homes being contrary to the Affordable Housing SPD. As you can see from Charlotte's presentation before you today, we have worked proactively with your officers and statutory consultees on all these reasons for refusal since the application was refused in December 2020. In order to amend our designs to address the reasons for refusal. I'll go through each reason to refuse, but I'll do it in quite a succinct manner, given that Charlotte's done a detailed presentation. So as you've seen, in order to address the internal standards of the properties, we have all our houses are now designed to NDSS standards, notwithstanding that NDSS is not required because the outline predates NDSS, but that's our approach to addressing those particular issues and that first reason for refusal. In regards to external space, you've seen before you today, the amber units have been redistributed throughout the site and they have more than adequate amenity space given the size of the properties that they serve. And we've removed our opal house, and this has been replaced by the 7 SV2, which is more appropriate house type and yields more usable garden space. And one of the examples that Charlotte has shown is how we've used the NS4, and this has been used more considerately and appropriately on the site. So you'll note from the officer's report, paragraphs 15.13 to 15.20, pages 72 and 73 of the report, that we have separation distances between some of the houses of our site between 12 and 16 metres. And Charlotte's demonstrated to you how we've actually tried to address these kind of closer relationships. And your officer has recommended through the use of planning conditions that we're more than happy to agree to the removal of permitted development rights for those particular plots. So that's how we address the first reason for refusal before you today. In regards to the second reason for refusal, what I've named inadequate infrastructure, we've worked proactively with your open space and landscape team, and we've designed open spaces like the T Park and all the little pocket parks so they can be easily accessed and used by all. The section 106, as Charlotte's pointed out, requires 0.72 hectares, and we're providing 0.91 hectares. And this is a 26% increase. Excuse me, a 26% increase over and above the section 106 requirements. And in regards to the play areas, again, we've worked with the officers throughout the application to provide a range of play equipment that is going to be subject to a further discharge of condition. In regards to cycle parking, we are provided a total of an additional 152 cycle parking spaces across the scheme, of which of the 152 additional, 32 additional are provided for visitors. In regards to the third reason for refusal, which is the impact upon neighbouring properties, I've used examples of facade to facade rather than Charlotte's distances to boundaries. So from facade to facade of the properties on the southern boundary to those in Grosvenor Court, we've achieved an 18-metre separation distance. In regards to the property that's been described on Holy Road, it's a 13-metre separation distance. In regards to the Holy Road property, this results in a further separation of 3.5 metres. And in regards to the Grosvenor Court, I've calculated to be 5.5 metre additional separation. We've removed the windows on the first floor of the properties to 1772, which have always overlooking into the side extension of rear garden of the neighbour on Holy Road. We consider that by virtue of the scale of the proposed dwellings along the southern boundary being 2-storey and being over 18 metres on Grosvenor Court, 13 metres on the side of Holy Road, being sited due north and the restriction of the windows should result in a scheme that no longer provides overbearing, overlooking, overshadowing issues that would warrant refusal of the application. In regards to condition 4, we have sought our affordable housing distribution across the site so it complies with the cluster sizes and SPD. Charlotte's outlined additional material considerations that we provided insofar as electric vehicle charging. In regards to the forthcoming Part L regulations, we've agreed to over a third of our homes being built to the Part L regulations, which come in force next year. And we've also understand the importance of climate change, and we've future-proofed our houses so occupants can install air source heat pumps should they wish to do so at a later date. This is controlled by way of a planning condition, the same condition that imposed on parcels 5 and 6 that you've heard in December last year. We have, through the landscape management document and condition, as Charlotte's shown, committed to the clearance of the ditch along the rear of the properties on Woodlark Road. In all, we feel as though we've actually addressed the 4 reasons for refusal, and we welcome the officer's recommendation and seek members' support of the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Chris. Now move to members' questions. If you could turn to page 53, please, and look at section 11. We have the assessment and the key issues. So if we could frame our questions and discussion around these bullet points, we'll cover everything, and it will prevent us from having a random discussion. So we start off with principle of development. Does anybody want to speak to that?
I just would like to say, I'd like to thank the case officer and the other officers for all their really hard work in working with the applicant to enable all of these really positive changes. And I'm pleased to see that the earlier decision of the committee not to accept the design has resulted in really what is a much better application, and it will benefit the current residents who move in, but also the future residents. I want to particularly say that I think meeting the space standards is great, and it's actually something we expect on all applications. The greater separation is really important for the existing adjacent residents, and I think they will appreciate that. I think the extra over open space is to be applauded as well. I hope the landscaping will really complement those spaces, especially with the climate crisis that we're getting. And just one more thing about the overall development is I'm really pleased that there is some bike parking at the front, because this is something some of the committee members raise again and again, that we want to make cycling as easy as possible, and I applaud that we have some at the front, and I hope anybody else listening will pick this up for future applications. I've got some other points, but I'll bring them in later. Thank you.
Does anybody else want to make a similar overview statement in relation to the application, or do you want to then proceed into the more specific details? I did see general agreement with Councillor Thornborough's comments. Councillor Pagent.
Trying to fit my comments into your box. I'm very concerned. This is a very architect designed and active development. But I'm concerned about what happens to these places after they get built. And I don't know whether you want to take that within this heading, so I'm going to say it anyway. I think that we should have no permitted development throughout the whole site. I think that should be a proviso that we put on. I know the officers raised it for certain parts of it, but I think that should be applied to the whole site. I also have a serious concern, having visited another dense site locally, that we agree something and it looks really good on paper. It gets built, it looks really good when it's built. And then the developer puts television aerials on the back or the front of the whole development. And it completely takes away the attractiveness of the housing development. And I'm wondering, can we put on this site, so no television aerials, no satellite dishes, because it absolutely destroys the look of the whole development. So I don't know if that comes within your overview, but I've now said what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. The office is making notes on the comments that have been made, and these will be picked up at the end of the discussion. So I'm not ignoring your points, Councillor Page. And does anybody else want to make a comment on matters of detail? In that case, can I just as an aid memoir, and just prompt any further comments, just go through the list. So, principle of development, I don't see anybody wanting to speak on that. Context of site design and external spaces, I think Councillor Page has made a comment on that. Katie, thought?
I would like to request the landscape, condition 9 is about the fencing, and I would like to request that we amend that to ask for hedgehog doorways in them. And I know my understanding is that Barratt Homes do cut in a hedgehog doorway for any resident who asks for it, and it's actually offered. But there's no point in having one doorway in a fence and no further, because they need to travel, and they can move up and down, 3 kilometres a night. And so that's what I would like to request, please.
I have a comment, and it relates to the Pavilion Green and the desire line which basically bisects the green as shown on the plan attached to your agenda papers. And what I'm concerned about is that it will create this desire line, and not just for pedestrians and cyclists, but for motorised two-wheelers as well. And I think introducing that danger across a children's play area is not a great design. And as the local ward councillor, I'm trying to design out future representations as people will be concerned about that mixing of introduction of traffic into a play area. So I'm concerned about that. Councillor Thornborough.
So can I just follow on with your comments about desire lines? I also feel that the allotments are great, but in the city we're looking at little links to make walking and cycling easier. And there is a hedgerow to the east of the allotments, and I feel that should be a footpath to connect one of the main roads into the allotments, so that residents who live in the existing development that's been handed over can actually make an easy route into the allotments rather than going all the way around. I wonder if that could be supported as part of the landscaping condition. Thank you.
Councillor Conn.
To come back on to the comment of Councillor Thornborough about cycle parking, I just wondered to know whether the cycle parking that's provided in the rear gardens, whether there's direct access to the exterior, whether they have to come through the properties to get access to those, because that's quite important that there should be access to the exterior for ease of access.
I'm going to ask the officer to answer that one.
Stores that are located to the rear, you don't have to go through the houses to get through them. There are some carports, and I showed in my presentation how the width of those carports has been adjusted to make sure that there is ample width in accordance with our cycle parking design guide. So that has been considered. Thank you.
Councillor Pora, do you want to comment on cycle parking?
I wasn't sure whether that would come up later under access and transport though, but as you want it now. I've got a few things on cycle parking as it happens. I am concerned about the rear. Obviously, I appreciate we can't enforce it, but it's good we've got 4 at the front, but I'd prefer to have more. So again, is there access from the rear gardens to some of those, or does everyone have to go through the houses for all of those house types? And the other thing I suppose I was going to talk about when we're talking about cycle parking is cargo bikes. I think we've got 5 spaces, but that's across the whole site, isn't it? Not just this parcel. I wanted to ask the officers whether we could consider some kind of condition that would encourage, for example, if someone wanted to convert a car space into parking, that there wouldn't be a penalty. I don't know if there will be, because obviously we're allocating car spaces on a, it was 1.5 per household, wasn't it, average. I would like us to make it as easy as possible that people living in those houses can say, actually, I don't need my car, I want to make it. So I just wondered if officers could comment on whether that is already possible or whether that is something we could condition if it's not, because I would hate the developer to be penalised for getting rid of parking spaces. I've got a couple of others, but I'll pick those up. Well, it's my usual green roofs on bin and cycle stores. Are we happy that that is covered by the existing conditions where we're going to look at the cycle store later? And yeah, I think, the other one will come out under cars, so I'll bring that up later.
Do you want to respond to any of those at this point?
Yes, I can comment on the cycle parking arrangements. They are different for each different house type, to be honest. So I can't kind of give you a standard. But what I can, I can bring up the plans again, showing you the stores that have been submitted and the access. It's not, just to reiterate, it's not access through the house itself, it's through carports. And as I said, we've adjusted the width for that. And some of them will have side gates, some of them don't. So it's not standard across the site, but it is something that the design team and myself, we have scrutinised that to make sure it works. Back to our cycle parking design guide for width, dimensions, and accessibility. The point about having cycle parking to the front, I think that's certainly something that we can take away for future phases of Darwin Green and look to see how that can be incorporated to some, if not all, of those dwellings. The point around if people wanted to adapt some of their car parking spaces, there's no requirement on the outline for car parking spaces once they're provided to be retained. So the future occupants would have the option to do that. And I don't think it's necessary for us to put any kind of planning incentive or anything else. There's nothing stopping them being able to do that in the future. In terms of green roofs for bin and bikes, the details will be secured through the resubmission of information to discharge those two conditions on the outline consents. I think we would need to look carefully about the feasibility of those green roofs for stores of those size. That was something we can certainly take away to discuss with the applicant.
So, does anybody want to speak on housing delivery? Any issues arising from housing delivery?
I'm not sure whether it counts as housing delivery or amenity, but the big concern I still have is the 4 flats that have no amenity. So I'm not sure whether you'd rather take that as delivering of the houses or of the amenity once they've been delivered. But that is the thing for me that is a sticking point at the moment, that we have 4 flats which have nothing, no outside amenity space, no balcony. So I'd be grateful if the officer could maybe explain. I appreciate there are site constraints, but if this were coming as 4 new flats in this development, we would refuse it for not having amenity space. So I'm just interested why there couldn't be some kind of balcony, and also how near they are to other open space. Thank you.
Yeah. You deal with that one, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll just try and show my presentation again to bring up the slide. Just bear with me a second. So these are the 4 flats over garages, and this is a house type that we have used quite commonly across our growth sites, and it does allow us for all the benefits that I talked about in terms of responding to site constraints. So there are benefits from it, and it also provides a mixture in the housing type. But if I just show you where those are located on the main site plan. So, just get my cursor back up. So, two of them are located centrally here. Are within a Muse area with very low traffic shared surface. So, there is opportunity to spaces. That's what those shared spaces are designed for. And the other two are located here. And there is really good proximity to the central park in this location. It's a very short walk for them to be able to access the largest green space in Darwin Green as well. So we felt that in those contexts, that was acceptable. And again, in terms of the acceptability of that, appreciate it's 4 dwellings that will be lived in by future occupants, but looking at the scheme as a whole and the constraints of the outline consent, which don't set any minimum external space standards, we felt that that was reasonable.
Charlotte. Councillor Thornborough.
I would like to support Councillor Porra on this point and ask that the officer try to seek an amendment to these for small balconies, as much for, drying laundry and, keeping energy use down, which we know is important from the experience we've just had. And the front faces northwest, so they get nice. They could get evening light coming in. So, and there may be an issue to do with overhanging a public road, but I think that could be resolved, and I think that would be preferable than not having some small external spaces. I would really encourage that. Thank you.
Chair, I think Councillor Thornborough, you have identified one of the issues is in terms of overhanging. If we were to put some external amenity space on, it would potentially, if it was an inset balcony, take away from some of the internal space. And if it was external, then we have been looking at tracking diagrams to see whether there might be possible, because we don't want obviously to overhang areas where refuse vehicles, for instance, might be accessing. So I would be reluctant to seek a condition that may not be either reasonable to enforce given the outline position, but also one that might not be able to be delivered because of those constraints. But
I could come in, please, Chair. Thank you. I note the concerns about these 4 properties, but I would caution about trying to seek further amendments given the considerable work that's already been undertaken, and for the reasons Charlotte has already advised. We need to focus on considering the scheme as presented today, and need to consider in the round the issues against the wider benefits of the scheme in other terms, noting that the outline consent doesn't provide for external space standards, and that this house type has been used elsewhere on other strategic sites, and it does have very good access to public open space, as Charlotte has demonstrated in her presentation. Thank you.
Mr. Bajan.
Yeah, well, showing the greatest of respect for officers' opinions. As councillors here, we have a duty to the people that are going to be living in these premises. And if we allowed it before, then maybe we were wrong before, or maybe we've got a bit more modern now. The idea of conditioning this is a good one. And I think that we need to find a way that there will be that amount of open space for the residents of these dwellings.
We're just touching really on residential amenity for future occupants, which is, we were sort of moving into that one. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to know who will take responsibility for the LEPs, in particular the maintenance of the play equipment. This is an issue that we have in South Cambs with parish councils looking after play equipment, making sure that they're safe.
It will be the City Council. And there are still discussions going, as you notice in this agenda paper, about the details of the scheme, just to ensure that the City Council, from that perspective, is satisfied with the proposal. Do you want to move to social and community infrastructure, page 73? What's the open space, the children's play spaces and the allotments? Provision for waste and recycling, public art. Councillor Pora.
Thank you. Under the social and community infrastructure, I was quite concerned about the delays in phasing. So particularly the Toucan crossing that isn't on Huntington Road. And I know that this wouldn't be significant enough to be a reason for refusal, but I would like some comfort from officers that we can condition that this has to appear. You know, and I'm also noting that we've got delays on the walk and cycling scheme, I think Histon Road signals, cycle upgrades on Histon Roads, the health centre, I understand something about that because obviously the NHS, we know there's been some delays, and the temporary community centre. Again, I reiterate, I understand that this isn't necessarily just this parcel, but I suppose I would like to put a shot across the bows that I'm not very happy that and I should say as well, I would like to just say how pleased I am, to echo what Councillor Thornborough said, to see the revised clustering. So I'm not trying to be negative about the whole development. I think the future-proofing is fantastic. The garden increases, which were my biggest concern last time, are much appreciated. So, and the clustering and the fact that we are sort of complying with quite a lot of N4 too. So I would like to put that on record that I'm supportive of those things. I'm grateful. But I am concerned about, well, I wouldn't want it to slip, shall we say, that when we come to the next parcel, we're still told the phasing hasn't happened. So I'd be grateful for officers' views on how we can make this quite robust. And particularly, I think, for the crossing under para 1213, where I think that was sort of quite material to this coming forward. And I don't want a situation where we're delayed again. Thank you.
I think, you know, overall compliance with the section 106 trigger points is a problem. The developer has missed the early trigger points. I'm very concerned about it. I've expressed that to the officers. The officers are dealing with the developer across the whole scheme because it relates to the original outline planning consent rather than specific parcels, and we can't really address those matters when we're dealing with the specific parcels. It's not material to what we're talking about today, but in strategic terms, of course, it is important. Barretts are making best endeavours, which is a bit, you know, a bit disappointing given that actually they should have met their trigger points, given that they've been able to build their houses, why not deliver on all these other items? Not all of them are in their hands, of course, particularly, you know, the nominated health, surgery and so on. But let's just say we're taking a very close view of it, and I've asked for a forward programme of trigger points to establish how far the developer is making progress with a view to meeting those. And there's some references to future ones. For example, the connection with Histon Road is coming up after 350 properties have been occupied, which isn't that far away. So I'll bring the officer in. You want me to bring the officer in? Yes, sorry. Charlotte, specific points about the Toucan crossing.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Specifically on the Toucan crossing, I had a meeting with the county highways engineer last week, specifically to understand whether this was a concern for him that it hadn't been delivered in relation to this parcel. He would actually support a move to delay the implementation of that, because he referred to there needing to be a certain volume of use for that crossing point before it's installed for safety reasons. So he wasn't concerned that there was any safety issue with that not being installed.
I do take on board what you're saying. I suppose my concern is that for future parcels, if we're always told that's an outline problem, we can't deal with it, there must be at some point where we can. So I'd just like to be clear that I would really hope the developer for future parcels does come forward with these on time. Thank you.
Councillor Porter, I think if we get into correspondence on this matter, I think that would be probably the best way to deal with that. Councillor Williams, you wanted to speak?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I do think, I consider this quite a serious breach of the outline permission, actually. But it does raise a question. How does this committee keep track of conditions? And I wonder whether there ought to be some process whereby conditions are reviewed and come to this committee to ensure that all members are aware of where we are with, not just with this particular development, but with other developments where we have conditions that, let's say, are being taken close to the edge by some of our developers. And I think we need to be kept informed.
Councillor Williams, I think you must have been reading my emails this week. I've discussed this matter with the Joint Director, and there's further discussions going on about how we might take a closer view of the performance of developers across the planning service against Section 106 obligations and trigger points. As matters stand, my understanding is that if a developer, and this is a trigger point, but is demonstrating that they're taking some form of action to deliver on it, there's not much more that we can do to secure compliance. So I have to say, I find that a very weak enforcement regime. So we will bring this to a member briefing session so that we can have a full discussion about this, because I think if members are signalling that they have a strong interest in this to the officers, it does strengthen the officers' hands in discussion with the developers. So I would very much welcome the interventions made by Councillor Porter and yourself on this matter.
Can I just come back on what you say? I think reputation is also very important for these developers, and I'm sure that they would not wish to be discussing their failure to meet 106 obligations to be discussed in public, and I would have thought that would be a very strong incentive to get them to comply.
Well, I have to say, Councillor Williams, my interest in this has been prompted by doorstep comments from people who bought houses from these developers. They're very concerned about these failures to deliver against their obligations, and it's causing a lot of upset. So it is out there in the public sphere, and I agree with you. Developers do need to protect their reputation because they're a business of selling homes for people to live in, and they just need to perform better against this, and that's what we'll try and work to do together. Thank you. Interlude. Getting all that off our chests. I've got Councillor Stowe. Can you speak? But he can't.
Yes,
Speak.
Hello.
Councillor Stobart, sorry, you must have been waiting some time. Sorry about that.
All of about 30 seconds, Simon. So it's really just a supplementary. I was having those same concerns, having read the documents and listening to Councillor Williams and to you, Councillor Smith. I just wonder whether, with regard to Section 106, we could usefully deploy the notion of a risk register associated with each of the items. It needn't be a big thing, but risk registers are widely used in the project management world to keep a track. And isn't this question of keeping a track and not being suddenly surprised that, the risk that we could have perceived suddenly results in a delay or some item of data or evidence, that should have been presented much earlier hasn't. So I just wanted to stir that in as a comment concerning Section 106. Could we entertain the notion of a risk register as a means of tracking possible delays?
That's an excellent suggestion, and we'll take that back to the discussion. Thank you, Councillor Stobart. Can we now move on to access and transport? Were there any other matters that people wanted to raise on this point? Councillor Pora?
Access and transport now, Chair, yeah. Just one, again, picking up on the car club spaces. So I mentioned earlier, again, similar to the cycle condition, are we able to, I think you mentioned this earlier, to ensure that car parking space, you said that, I think you've covered it actually, so I get slightly confused, Chair, I've got them in different order. So, yeah, you're confirming that we don't need a condition, then you're happy. Could the developers swap? I think, I'm not doing this, it's too hot today. Let me start again. Car club spaces, there are 5 across the site, in the whole site, not just this parcel. Can we allow the developer to allow more? Because again, I would not want them to be constrained by us saying you've got to have this many visitor parking or house parking. I don't know if that's something we can, it's almost unconditioning it, isn't it? But because again, I feel really strongly that if we don't have enough car club spaces, people are going to buy cars. And actually 5, originally I thought that's quite good for 300 and something, but actually if it's across the whole site, it's not a huge amount. So I would really, really like to incentivise the developer to be able to do that, because, you know, this should be quite a sustainable development. It's got good cycle links. So I would really like your advice on how we could do that without, so to encourage the developers, so not making them have to come back for planning permission if they want to do that.
Through you, Chair. Yes, the outline consent requires a minimum number of car parking spaces. So there's nothing on the outline consent that would constrain them from doing more. And I think it's worth noting that, again, it's an outline consent from 2013. And I think the use of car clubs has grown rapidly over the last few years. And to some extent, it's market and demand led. And I don't think they require any permissions to change a parking space into a car club space. That would be my understanding, whether there's any constraints on the public highway, but I think that I'm sure there are options in the future.
Anybody else want to make a point on this? I'd like to make a comment, because I'm going to carry the flag for Councillor Pora on off-gauge cycles. I think Councillor Pora has made this point many, many times, and it's finally sunk home with me that actually this is going to be a very, very popular mode of transport. We've got, we're going to be consultation on the making connections, road charging. There's no doubt we have to reduce the traffic. I mean, the weather, the temperature over the last few days has demonstrated we do need to make more and more urgent action to reduce carbon emissions. That's got to mean less vehicles on the road. And not everybody is fit enough to pedal a cycle and or carry a big loads of shopping and so on. So this is the future. And just as much as we future-proof the houses for air source heat pumps and low temperature radiators and so on, I think we need to be future-proofing the cycling storage arrangements. And I think we need to make a step change in that, frankly. And if that means changing a car parking space in, say, the courtyards for the apartment blocks, so there's purpose-built, secure cycle parking spaces, off-gauge cycle parking spaces on those plots, then I think it will just actually facilitate demand if we're actually putting the supply side in, ahead of the demand. And I would encourage the developer to do that, because actually when we're talking about planning here, we're actually talking about the livability, how people are going to be living in the future generations in these houses. So it sort of blurs between planning and development, but this is the feedback that we can give to developers because we're on the ground and we're seeing this, we know the wider policy context. So that's what I'd want to see. Councillor Pora, thank you.
Just following on from, Chair, your points and Councillor Pora's, I think actually we shouldn't be calling carports or garages. We should be calling them transport storage spaces, really. And ideally, going forward, they would be the bike storage and then that would mean that if there's storage in the back garden, they may be able to clear that and actually have some more external space. But it has to go hand in hand with what Councillor Pora was saying about community car space, which is sort of dotted around. And the best example is Marmalade Lane, where they've got, rather than on-plot parking, they've got a parking area. And 10 families have given up their cars to share 2 community cars, electric community cars of different sizes. And then those 10 spaces have been given back to the community as a kind of external space. So having more parking areas for community cars is really important. And I believe in Northstowe they have less on-plot parking and more of these parking areas. And I think that's to be commended going forward. Thank you.
Councillor Pora.
Thank you. Dare I suggest an informative to support the transformation of car spaces to bike and for car spaces to car club. I would be very tempted, if officers would let me get away with it, to add something into any of the conditions we've already got about sustainable travel, to, for example, put something in the welcome pack to say, you know, the developer is really keen to support this. Because again, it's that thing, it's too late once someone's moved in and bought 2 cars. Whereas so I don't know, I suspect you'll say it's not possible, but some way of just incentivising it and just putting it out there, as the chair says, to say, we're a developer that supports this. If you want advice on it, let us know. Or if you want more car clubs, tell us here. So anything we could do I know we can't enforce it, but something like that, if the officer would consider it, I'd be really grateful, because it would make a difference, I think.
Sense that the officer is responding to that by typing Madeleine Lane. So we'll see what we come up with, but I'd also encourage the developer to do a prototype of these off-gauge cycle stores as well. They pioneered hedgehog holes, gaps. Why not this as well? They are the country's leading house developer after all. Okay, so have we done access and transport to death? So energy and sustainability. Councillor Thornborough.
Yes. Applicants pointed out their provision of EV charging is actually covered under the recent amendments to the Building Regulations Part L, which came into effect middle of June. And also the Part F amendments, which came into effect, increase the energy efficiency requirements of new buildings beyond what we have previously asked for through planning policy, which is very good, and our sustainable construction SPD is going to be updated in line with the building regs. But also in mid-June, the building regulations provided 2 new parts, Part O and amendment of Part F, I think. So Part O covers overheating and Part F is about ventilation. And I think these are incredibly important requirements under the building regulations. So I would ask that we put in an informative that the requirements under Part O and Part F are provided, are followed. I know some developers are complaining about these amendments because they have already got planning consent, and the building regulations means that they're having to change the window sizes and the ventilation, the opening sizes for ventilation, and therefore they're having to go back for amendments. But this is incredibly important. We're one of the hottest parts of the country. We must make sure that our buildings are designed to prevent overheating and deal with passive ventilation. So I would hope that this could be an informative, and we will need to put this informative on future applications as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Anybody who slept in Cambridge last night or Cambridgeshire last night disagree with that? Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Chair. My comments follow on very much from the comments of Councillor Thornborough. I do welcome the efforts that the developers have gone to with officers to deal with the concerns that were raised previously in December 2020. On the specific issue of sustainability, I believe we have the sustainability officer standing by this morning, and I notice the comments at 614. supporting subject to the conditions set out there. My particular concerns, firstly, I do back up what Councillor Thornborough said about solar gain and heat. This is a much greater problem than we thought in the past, and whatever the Part O may say, we've got to make sure that future residents are safeguarded from this. Looking at 1912, I welcome the fact that the site is designed to avoid overheating through deciduous trees and so on. To allow useful solar gain in winter, inevitably there is the problem of solar gain in summer, even though the apartments will be dual aspect and relatively shallow. Again, I support what was said earlier about the need for balconies or some access to space, not just to open space, but for things like drying clothes and so on. Chair, at section 12 on page 108, I notice these houses are to be future-proofed for low temperature heating. On other sites, the same developers are used to having sustainable show homes. That would not be appropriate for this site, but it does mean that those purchasing units here would have to consider these options, including heat pumps, in the future. And I would suggest that the concerns that Councillor Bajent had earlier on about TV aerials might be as nothing to the concerns about current design of air source heat pumps. And there is, of course, a great opportunity, it may be going beyond what is reasonable here, but to look at ground source heat pumps for new development like this, because there is the opportunity for passive cooling, which does not arise with air source heat pumps, even if they are subsequently chosen by the individual occupiers. And it seems to me impractical to say that there will be space for an external air source heat pump in the future. In practice, these things happen when people move in, are specified in purchasing the house or the flat, as the case may be. Even if the hot water tank and the radiator are the right size. Similarly, Chair, I do welcome the provisions for EV charging, but when you combine that with the possibility of future heat pumps, we will have a significant strain on the limited grid capacity. And I do think we need to look at not just the 10% provisions, which are basically the Merton rules going back to 2003, we do need to look at the provision of solar PV where that is possible. Now, I recognise that it may be unreasonable to expect the developers to meet all of those concerns at this stage, but I would welcome comments on what can be done to safeguard the sustainability of these houses in the future.
Thank you for Councillor Fane. Just so happens we have our sustainability officer on hand to respond to your questions. Emma.
Good morning. Yeah, just to respond, if I start with the changes to building regulations, and I'm just going to apologise, my dogs have just woken up. Hopefully they won't disturb us. So this scheme will be subject to the new Part F requirements. I think I would like to reassure councillors that throughout all of our pre-application discussions, the issue of overheating is something that we do talk about quite a lot. But yes, the Part F requirements will apply to this scheme. I think certainly those units that are going to be assessed against the new Part L 2021 requirements, they will also need to be assessed against the Part F requirements, because the transitional arrangements for the two parts of building regulations are the same. With regards to the future-proofing concerns and things like the location of air source heat pumps, as part of the condition wording, I think it's condition 12 on the application, we do also talk about external space for air source heat pumps, because we recognise that that's quite an important consideration, making sure that there is that space for the air source heat pump. There are going to already be photovoltaic panels included across the scheme, and I think we were looking at least 1 kilowatt of PV panels for each residential unit on the site. And I know that the applicant will have already looked at and been in discussions with UK Power Networks to make sure that there is sufficient grid capacity to kind of meet the energy strategy as it stands at the moment. Also thinking about electric vehicle charge points as well. So those are all issues that will have already been discussed with UK Power Networks. So yeah, there are already going to be photovoltaic panels across the site. And as I say, there's the space for the air source heat pump unit itself is included in condition 12.
So, Thane, do you have any follow-up questions to that?
Part of the point I was making is that we are looking at the current electricity demands of these flats and houses as specified. If we see an increase in EV charging and an increased use of heat pumps, then the electricity demand from these flats will be much greater. And it's not clear to me that with use of air source heat pumps, and we've no idea at this stage what the COP of those will be, but inevitably rather higher than ground source and with no passive cooling available, there will be greater electricity demand. Are we meeting the 1 kilowatt of PV per unit is a start, but it's not much more than that. Are we doing sufficient? Are the developers planning sufficient to meet the future needs of this site?
No?
Yeah, so if I can come back on that, that's a piece of work that is actually ongoing, looking at kind of, I suppose, Cambridge and South Cambridgeshire as a whole. So not just thinking about this site, but we are in the process of looking at future electricity infrastructure requirements across the area as a whole, partly related to new growth, but we'll also need to make an allowance for, I suppose, kind of retrofit of existing stock, and including, you know, these schemes that are coming forward now but might, you know, end up with additional generation and kind of, you know, air source heat pumps on them. So that is a piece of work that is underway. There's a local area energy plan that's being developed for the whole of Cambridgeshire, which will be developed working with UK Power Networks. And that's going to be a critical piece of that work, is looking at, you know, what do we need to transition to net zero carbon, and how can we go about enhancing kind of electrical infrastructure to support that transition. So yeah, just to assure councillors that that is a piece of work that is currently underway.
Thank you, Emma. I'm aware through a member of the Joint Assembly of the GCP that we're going to need to treble grid capacity in our planning area for the electrification of heating and transport. So it's one of those huge, big infrastructure challenges that we face alongside water resources as well. So, Councillor Thornborough, did you want to add a comment on?
The point raised by Councillor Fane it goes hand in hand with what I've been asking about, this informative, because the new part O is about overheating, and it's specifically about ensuring every single new building, you know, that starts on site, that hasn't dropped, that this scheme won't have got building control consent because they haven't got planning consent yet. So when they apply for building control consent, they will have to comply with Part O, and that requires to be shown that passive ventilation has been considered, and the revised Part F is about ventilation, and it's very specific about the amount of window space facing south, which could be prone to overheating, and then the amount of opening for ventilation. So my expectations is that there's going to be a lot of schemes coming back to planning to revise the elevations in accordance with what they have to provide now for building control. Thanks.
There is an item here which is the impact residential amenity of the existing properties. We had a very detailed presentation on this. Are there any questions arising from that? Any further environmental considerations? Yes, sorry. I'm bringing in Councillor Stobart at this point.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. I think a number of the questions that I was thinking of have been dealt with, but I just wanted to point out there's quite a lot of detail wrapped up in this. So, for example, solar panels are rendered a little more effective with space for a battery. That complicates things with regard to export, and what can help is smart tariffs, which are enabled by certain types of architecture. So, for example, a smart EV charger just makes things a little easier. Now, I just wanted to ask a more perhaps general point around somebody buying one of these houses who turns up at the show home and starts negotiating and says, I really do want a heat pump as opposed to a gas boiler. Are they going to be in a position to select the heat pump and then specify some aspects of the architecture of the home around their own aspirations? Is that feasible in a development like this? And is there anything that can be done at this stage to ease the process of individual choice around sustainability architectures?
Emma, can I bring you in on that one, please?
Apologies, Teams is going a bit slow for me. I think one of the tricky points with kind of specifying additional technologies is getting it specified at the right stage when you're buying your new property. So I know certainly I bought a new home when I was living up in Cambridge a while ago, and you had to be kind of specifying additional bits of equipment quite early on in the build process. I mean, that's certainly something we could potentially take away and discuss with the applicant, but I think it's making sure, certainly with things like air source heat pumps at the moment, what I'm hearing more generally is there are supply chain issues with actually getting hold of them at the moment. Sure. So I think if a resident wanted to get that added to their build instead of a gas boiler, they would just need to be getting in quite early in the build process, potentially before the slab had been laid, just to make sure there was enough lead-in time to actually then purchase those additional bits of equipment, because I think there is quite a delay at the moment from what I'm hearing more generally with people looking to retrofit heat pumps. There are difficulties getting hold of equipment at the moment, but it's certainly it's something that we could discuss with the applicant to see if there could be some additional choices set out for those looking to purchase these new homes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are we drawing to an end of the discussion? Anybody want to raise anything else? Okay, so we've done some detailed points about the scheme, and we've talked generally about planning and sustainable development as along the way, which is useful because it's a reflection on what we want to see from future developments, and it's a kind of learning process. So that's very helpful. So, Charlotte, are you going to do a summary and draw all the threads together?
Chair, there are a couple of points from early on in the discussion that I'd like to come back on.
Okay, and then are you going to?
Philippa will pass over to Philippa for that. So I just wanted to pick up on some of the earlier points around Councillor Bainjan asking, could PD rights be removed across the site? I think we always need to be mindful of conditions meeting the relevant tests. And I think what I've tried to do really carefully is to look at the circumstances where I think it's reasonable to remove the permitted development rights And that's why a number of plots have been identified in the specific wording. The reason for that is I didn't think it would be reasonable to apply it across the site because so many circumstances are different. The separation distances are different, therefore it's not really appropriate to apply it across the site. Your second point was around density and around changes that are made later on in the design process. Obviously, to some extent, that is the future occupant's choice, is to be able to make additions to their house, but certainly any elements that require planning permission would come back to the authority, and we would take into account, for instance, the design code and the prevailing character and the aspirations of the scheme when it was originally built. Councillor Thornborough, your question regarding condition 9 and whether it can be amended to include hedgehog doorways. Condition 9 specifically relates to the external boundary fencing to the site, which is already post and rail fencing. So it wouldn't be necessary to put hedgehog holes in that. My understanding is that Barretts are committed to hedgehog holes across the site, but I can certainly look at that kind of going forwards. And Councillor Smith, just picking up on your comment about Pavilion Green and the potential for conflicts with the design line going through the park. We have had discussions along those lines with the applicant's landscape officer and also with the Streets and Open Spaces team, and we have looked at further amendments to that area which might reduce that conflict. So, for instance, the layout of the play area to avoid play desire lines crossing that area, and it is bollarded on either end. So it is something that we are mindful of when we'll be looking at the further detail when that comes in again. And finally, Councillor Thornborough, you had a final question just about the allotments and whether there could be further links that were created. We did discuss that with the Streets and Open Spaces team who would be taking on the allotments. They raised security concerns with having too many links, and it was felt that actually having the one point of access was better in this situation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Thornborough.
Sorry to come back on another issue, but it's a bit about the permitted developments on some of the other big sites. I know Marley, for example, we removed permitted development to convert the garage to habitable space because of what we don't want is cars to be parked in the streets around the homes rather than in the homes. And I think that is something it should be come back for planning if they want to have an alternative for the transport storage unit, because I think if they wanted to give up their storage of cars, it would be important that they retain the storage of bikes. So I wondered if the officers might comment on that.
On what they could do with a side extension conversion under PD anyway, but that could be something that we could look at doing if that's something that to comment on. Philippa, do you want to add? Have a different opinion?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I would always exercise caution to ensure that the any condition that we will be proposed to take away of permitted development rights were reasonable. But I think under the circumstances that you've given Councillor Thornborough, I think it would be potentially reasonable to restrict permitted development rights so that should a conversion of a garage space be sought by a resident following occupation, that then we could assess potential impact in terms of the loss of the car parking space on the wider development.
Right. Can I just come back to the design line of the Pavilion Green? I noticed there were bollards at both ends of on the drawing, and that conflicts with LTN 120. So I think the thing is that, and I've been looking at these kinds of things through woodwork, and actually you can't reduce the risk. I think the solution here is to actually remove it entirely. This is a play area. children run around randomly. That's the joy of being a child. And the problem of being a parent is actually making sure they're not going to run into something. And I just think this really does need to be the safest possible space for the children. And there will be a lot of children in this scheme. So I suggest we go back to the drawing board on that and remove this risk, please.
Chair, I'm going to try one more time about the permitted development. My understanding is that a certain percentage of the plot can be increased with building under permitted development. Now, none of these plots are extensive. And had they been submitted to us with the permitted development added, we probably would have turned them down. So I think that it's not unreasonable for us to require every change on this site to come back for planning. You know, if we were in that position, we would be turning these things down. And, you know, well, I've made the point. I'm just asking for this to be included.
Councillor Bagent, I'm going to ask the officers to just remind us of the scope of development that is allowed under permitted development, and to remind us that this application has come back because it was partly refused on grounds of the future amenity of residents, and the size of gardens and the open space was very much part of that. So effectively what you're saying is that all of this could be reversed through permitted development. We'd have no control over that at all. And that's your point, isn't it?
Well, I think that is actually my point. You know,
Yeah.
If it came back with all this in it, we would not be accepting it. So I don't like to push back against officers, but I just think for the future.
I think now you've put it that way, I think the officers might want to reflect on that.
Did notice the nod.
And they will come back and say something slightly different, perhaps. Let's see.
Just bear with me a second, because I'm just checking the permitted development rights, because I did look at this issue and consider whether it could be a site-wide removal of permitted development rights for extensions. And I just want to check the detail of it, because when I looked at it, the number of instances permitted development rights would actually allow them to extend was quite reduced anyway, because there has to be a certain distance from the rear boundary, as well as the portion of the garden. So if I can just have a moment just to check the detail.
Oh, is this going to take you some time? Do you want to...
I'd quite like to just make sure I'm getting it correct. So
Yeah, so could we just have a break for 5 minutes? Would 5 minutes... No pressure. Thank you very much. We'll just break for 5 minutes while we resolve this point. We are dealing with future generations of 400 odd people, aren't we? 100, 200, 320 people, so families, yeah. So I think 5 minutes break just to get this right is a good thing to do. Thank you. Okay, so can we just recommence the meeting? I'm going to ask Philippa to sum up. I will add some comments. And Charlotte is then going to introduce the recommendations, and Philippa will read them out, and then we'll take the matter to a vote. So, Philippa.
Thank you, Chair. The application as presented has clearly been comprehensively reviewed by officers, and clearly a lot of work has gone into addressing the previous reasons for refusal, both from officers and also the applicant team. We've heard in detail this morning how the proposals before you overcome those issues in terms of meaningful changes to the design of the scheme to improve existing and proposed residential amenity, better supporting infrastructure such as public open space, play areas and cycle parking, and improvements to the clustering of affordable housing. In addition, and in comparison to the original scheme which was refused, this application will also deliver benefits which exceed the requirements of the outline planning consent. For example, provision of active EV charge points for on-plot spaces. All of these commitments are welcomed and will achieve a greater carbon reduction than the current standards. And in addition, the applicant has also taken on board concerns of local residents and committed to the maintenance of a ditch to the rear of properties on Woodlark Road. I'd like to take the opportunity to pick up on specific issues raised by members during the course of the discussion. First of all, the concerns about the 4 properties with no external amenity space. Now, it is acknowledged that this is a disbenefit of the scheme, but it does need to be considered against the wider and significant other social, economic and environmental benefits that this scheme will deliver, noting that the outline consent doesn't provide for external open space standards, and that this committee has approved this property type on other sites quite recently. I'd also like to remind members that this particular dwelling type was also part of the scheme that was refused in December 2020. There have been no material changes since then which would warrant the justification of an alternative design being considered. I'd be concerned that trying to secure a planning condition to achieve member aspirations to change this house type or this dwelling type wouldn't meet relevant planning condition tests, including the important need to be necessary, enforceable and precise. And with regard to sustainability matters, it's recognised the aspirations of members, and we've heard from the Council's Principal Sustainability Officer that a lot of work has already gone into ensuring that this scheme is future-proofed and that there's a suite of planning conditions relating to sustainability to secure this. I would caution against recommending an additional informative regarding building regulations. This would be covered under separate legislation, and we've heard from Emma Davis, the Principal Sustainability Officer, that the scheme will be subject to and assessed against building regulation requirements. To pick up on some other specific comments made by members, the point regarding the transformation of car parking spaces to car club spaces or alternative cycle parking spaces, I think that was Councillor Porra. Yes, I think that we recommend that an additional informative could be deployed with delegated authority to officers to agree the wording of that particular informative. We've also heard concerns about permitted development and the ability of future residents to do certain things to their properties under permitted development rights. We consider it would be appropriate to remove permitted development rights with regard to the conversion of garages to habitable space. Again, delegated authority to officers to agree the wording. That would be a planning condition which restricts that conversion. There's also concerns been raised regarding the installation of aerials and the proliferation of aerials on the roofscape with reference to other sites in the Cambridge area. Again, it wouldn't be unreasonable to secure a planning condition which remove the permitted development rights with regard to installation of aerials, which would be required then to be subject to a planning application to be assessed. Again, we could do that via a planning condition. And finally, there's concerns being raised regarding, from Councillor Smith, regarding the Pavilion Green open space and the design line, and concerns that with children playing, there might be a natural design line for motorised vehicles or scooters or boy bikes to come through that area, causing safety issues. I think, having spoken to the case officer and looked at the recommendation, it would be appropriate in these circumstances to not approve the outline planning condition 14, which relates to hard and soft landscaping. You'll see that in the second part of the recommendation that will come on later in the table in your report. If we don't approve the hard and soft landscaping details, this will provide an opportunity for the developer to come back to look again at the open space in Pavilion Green, to design out that design line, perhaps by way of additional soft landscaping to prevent that natural design that was raising concern with Councillor Smith. Councillor Smith has just reminded me that there is also the recommendation to, following concerns by members, to remove permitted development rights with regard to the extension of properties. And again, officers see that as being a reasonable request. Thank you, Councillor Smith. So, in conclusion, the development of this allocated site will clearly bring clear economic, social and environmental benefits. It's been found to accord with the outline planning consent requirements and also accords with the development plan framework, is acceptable with regard to all material planning considerations subject to planning conditions and informatives that I've summarised now, but I'm sure Charlotte will confirm again. So I noticed a hand up. Thank you.
Councillor Thornborough.
I think you said that you didn't want to have an informative about referencing the new building regs part O and F. I really feel, Cambridge City, the City Planning Committee has used such an informative, so it's not a new request regarding in planning committees, and it just recognises that if the applicant goes to a private building inspector to deal with building regulations, they cannot use the argument that they've already got planning consent and therefore there could be some leeway on the requirements of building regulations. So I really feel that we should put this in, I'm afraid.
Noting the point that the City Planning Committee have already used such an informative, I think we will have regard to that, and on that basis we will use that, and we can certainly add that to the suite of informatives as well. Thank you, Councillor Thornborough.
Thank you. I just want to make a few comments in that the refusal of this planning application was made before I was a member of this committee or even just a councillor, and what it's shown is that how the diligence of this committee has led to a much improved scheme with the support of the officers and the collaboration with the developer. Much has been gained. I think we live in a world where it's a bit of a moving target for developers, where as events unfold, regulations come in, there's always space to make even further improvements, but at some point we just have to say, we have to make a decision on a planning application on the balance of merits. So what we want to do now is just ask Charlotte to introduce the recommendation so you can understand exactly what's been considered here, because it's an unusual one to have in front of us. So Charlotte, can you just introduce it, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and I'll just bring up my presentation again. Apologies, I thought I was on the right page, but... Right. Okay, so the recommendation is, as set out in paragraphs 2.4, 24.1 and 24.2, and as amended as follows. But the recommendation is to approve the Planning Commission of Reserved Matters application subject to the conditions and informatives set out in the report, and which I will show you on the next slide. Those additional conditions and informative that Philippa has referred to are 6. Number 1, the additional informative regarding supporting transformation of car parking spaces to car club places and alternative cycle parking spaces with delegated authority to officers to agree the wording. 2, the removal of permitted development rights regarding the conversion of garages to habitable space with delegated authority to agree the wording. 3, the removal of permitted development rights with regard to the installation of aerials. 4, removal of permitted development rights regarding extensions to properties. 5, to not approve, I'll come on to that one later, sorry. And 6, the additional informative regarding building regulations in regard to sustainability. The second part of the recommendation relates to the conditions. So paragraph 24.2, the recommendation is to approve or not approve the partial discharge of the outline planning conditions in relation to the BDW2 parcel. And that is in accordance with the table below, which I have updated based on Philippa's summary. So the recommendations are related to the conditions that have been submitted, are covered in the right-hand column. So those would be to either part discharge it in relation to this reserved matters or to not approve it. And the amendment to the recommendation relates to condition 14 for the hard and soft landscaping scheme. An update to the recommendation is that that would not be approved.
Philippa, can you now read out? Yep.
Aerials and satellite dishes. For 3? Is it? Where? No, not aerials and satellite dishes. I think
It's the same PD, but...
It's the same thing, but we'll add the 2 words for the avoidance of doubt.
Sorry to be a
No.
pain. I think that this has worked really well. There's a lot of people going to be really grateful.
Councillor Bajan, you're a very helpful member of this committee. Councillor Thornbury, you're a very helpful member of this committee too.
Has the hedgehog doorways been lost? Because every single time this application has come to committee, I've actually raised it to do with either landscaping or fencing. And I know Barrett's are very good about offering to put them in, but I think we...
Charlotte.
Yes, I can respond to that. So it is Barrett's practice to put hedgehog holes in. I would be confident already in their proposals, but seeing as we're not now discharging the hard and soft landscaping scheme, I can make a note to check that when it comes back in again.
Thank you. Are we all done? Can we now ask Philippa to read out the recommendations, please, and then we'll move to the vote. Thank you.
Thank you. And apologies, Charlotte, I'm going to ask you to pop up on the screen the amendments, and I'll come to that in a moment. So we're going to turn now to the recommendation, and you'll find this in section 24 of your committee agenda, and that's on the bottom of page 102. So first of all, it's a two-part recommendation that you'll be voting on. First of all, to approve the planning permission of reserved matters application reference 210441 REM, subject to the conditions and informatives set out in the report from page 105 onwards. That's section 25 of the report, with the additional amendments to the conditions and informatives as stated by Charlotte, with delegated authority to officers in respect of the wording of all of those either additional conditions, informatives or changes. So just to run through, that relates to number 1, an additional informative regarding supporting the transformation of car parking spaces to car club spaces or alternative cycle parking spaces. Number 2, a condition relating to the removal of permitted development rights regarding the conversion of garages to habitable space. Number 3, the removal of permitted development rights with regard to the installation of aerials and satellite dishes, another planning condition. And a final planning condition, an additional one relating to the removal of permitted development rights regarding extensions to properties. There will also be an additional informative regarding building regulations in respect of sustainability. The first officer recommendation under 24.1.
Can we raise your hand if you're in support of that recommendation? Just introduce the next one.
Thank you. And moving now to the second part of the recommendation, which is found on section 24.2 on page 103, to approve or not approve the partial discharge of outline planning conditions in so much as they relate to BDW2 parcel reserve matters. According to the recommendations set out in the table on page 103, with the exception of condition 14, which will be not approved, that relates to hard and soft landscaping.
And could members please raise their hands if in support? Councillor Fane? Thank you very much. It looked like a big effort. Thank you very much. So that's approved. That's approved. Thank you very much. Now, in the absence of the lunch monitor, do you want to break for lunch now? And I'm getting the hang of this. I'm going to actually ask how long you want, but can it be 20 minutes? 25? 30 minutes. I'm taking bids at 30 minutes. Fair warning. Back at 1:15, please. Thank you very much. And just before we go, just to repeat the thanks and appreciation for the work that the officers have done to bring this scheme to such a good conclusion. Thank you so much, Charlotte, in particular, for all the work that you've done. It's a very, very thorough report, and the level of detail you've gone into this is exceptional. So thank you so much. But also, I think we need to, it would also be appreciation to the members today for, again, scrutinising this and coming and looking through it in detail too. And I think we made some additional further improvements to the scheme. So thank you, members. It is a real joy, actually, chairing this committee. Thank you. Okay, so we're back online and we're addressing agenda item 5, 22/01842/FUL, the Cowley Road Depot, Cambridge. Is Will Nichols present? Thank you. Anyone else who's present who has registered to speak? No? Okay. So, Julia's online. Julia Briggs, could you please introduce the report?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen. Okay. This application seeks the continued temporary use of the Cambridge City Council depot at Cowley Road from December 2023 until December 2026. As noted on the committee agenda sheet, the application is being brought to committee as a Regulation 3 application, with the Cambridge City Council as the applicant and landowner intending to undertake the development. The site is shown here in red, and it is located in the north of Cambridge City on Cowley Road, off of Milton Road that you can see here to the west. The wastewater treatment plant and the Mick George recycling facility are located to the north. There is a golf driving range to the east and commercial and industrial uses to the south and to the east of the site. It's also worth noting that the site is within an area of major change and the emerging Northeast Cambridge Area Action Plan site. The City Council depot is currently operating from the site under a temporary permission that ceases in December 2023, and the application before committee seeks a further temporary approval until December 2026. A further temporary approval is being sought by the City Council to enable council operations to continue operating from the current site while a scheme for a permanent location goes through planning and delivery. A further permission would ensure a smooth transition of services from the site. The City Council is aiming for the new site to be operational by the end of 2024, and the permanent site that is currently being looked at is proposed to the northeast of the current site, and it sits just on the edge of the map here, approximately where my pointer is now. This slide shows the location plan that we've just looked at. The depot is used to support activities undertaken by the City Council, including street cleaning, litter collection, maintenance of public open space, and maintenance of housing and commercial buildings owned by the Council. This plan shows the current and proposed site layout. The site contains welfare and training porta cabins at the front, car and cycle parking, electric vehicle charging, storage areas to the rear, and wash down bays and waste bays to the rear as well. There are no proposed changes to the layout, and the scheme remains unchanged from the current temporary permission. This slide is included to show an example of the temporary porta cabin elevations. So no objections have been received on this application, with Highways and the Environmental Health team most notably not raising any objections to the continued operation, as it is consistent with the surrounding commercial and industrial land uses. The site falls within the Northeast Cambridge Area Action Plan area. The AAP is currently paused at the moment and is expected to continue in around 2024. A temporary permission on the site is supported, as it would allow the continuation of an acceptable use on the site and does not prejudice the potential future redevelopment of the site under the AAP. I would also just like to draw your attention to the amended wording of condition 1 that is included on the amendment sheet. This additional wording would require a restoration plan to be submitted to the local planning authority for approval 6 months prior to the temporary consent expiring. So the recommendation is to approve the application with conditions for the temporary approval of 3 years and to control dust and noise, along with delegated authority to officers to carry out minor amendments to the conditions prior to issuing the planning permission. And that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Could Will Nichols, who's speaking in favour of the application, make his representations? I remind you that you have 3 minutes to speak, and I will stop you when you reach 3 minutes, please. Come to a speaker here, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Some of this may be repetition, forgive me for that, but here goes. As members will be aware, the current depot on Cowley Road is a temporary facility that's been used since the vacation of the Mill Road depot, which is now coming to fruition. As the case officer explains, the proposal seeks a further temporary planning permission to enable the continued use of the site as a depot until 31st of December 2026, although we don't envisage it needing something of a backstop. The depot is used by Cambridge City Council to manage operational elements such as street cleaning, grounds maintenance and pest control, and helps to ensure the smooth running behind the scenes elements of the city that ensure residents, businesses and visitors alike get to experience a well-functioning city. The additional temporary consent has been sought to ensure this smooth transition to a new site further along Cowley Road, which will house a new operational hub to serve the city to 2050 and beyond. The precise boundaries of this new site have yet to be confirmed. The new operational hub is proposed to represent a step change in facilities as the City Council moves to net zero, and the new replacement facility will see the transition to an all-electric fleet of vehicles complete with EV charging points. The use of the current depot site for this temporary use for an extended period is considered appropriate given the context, and a further limited period is not considered to prejudice the potential future redevelopment of the land, and we welcome the case officer's recommendation for approval. The site will continue to operate as currently permitted and does not propose any additional buildings or structures, so is essentially a continuation of the current temporary use, which would continue seamlessly after the 31st December 2023 when the current permission expires. Given the current timescales for development of the North East Cambridge Area Action Plan, the proposed use of the site would not prejudice the implementation of the Area Action Plan. The City Council is in frequent dialogue with adjoining landowners, such as Anglian Water and its joint development partner, UNI, to ensure that the ongoing use will not interfere with or delay the wider proposals for the area. While the current programme for the new operational hub would see a phased transition to the new site in late 2024, possibly early 2025, the temporary consent to the end of 26 provides an extended backstop that would ensure that vital services operated out of the depot are not interrupted in the event that the transition to the new site takes a little longer than anticipated, while, as explained, not having any impact on the delivery of the North East Cambridge Area Action Plan. I therefore respectfully request that members resolve to support the case officer's recommendation to approve this application, and obviously if members have any questions, I'd be more than happy to try to answer them as best I can. Thank you.
Questions are asked of the case officer. Okay, thank you. So, members, Katie Thorne, please.
Well, I have been up to this site and seen the porta cabins and everything. And my question really is the porta cabins are porta cabins, and I just wondered if these are really important part of the council services. These are really key people who have kept the city going through the pandemic. We know that now. It's so clear. And their well-being is really important. So I have really no objections to the continued location here of the depot, but I just wondered what the case officer can thoughts about the continued use of the porta cabins for facilities for the drivers. I think there's a little kind of rest space, and the offices, particularly in the heat. You know, I think these have been there for some time. If we'd known that these were going to be for the full duration of the current temporary consent and another temporary consent, would we have maybe not asked for a more environmentally better facilities? It may be that they're air conditioned, but again, air conditioning is not the best environmental thing that we have. You know, we might have asked for a green roof or photovoltaics on the roof. So I wonder if the officer could kind of answer that. Thank you.
Thank you. Julia, could you respond to that, please?
Through you, Chair. The only thing I would add there is that there's 80 staff working from the site, and I understand that the majority of them work off-site, and this is only used, the porta cabins are only used temporarily. Obviously, there'll be some staff that do work there throughout the day, but the majority of staff do not work there. And I believe the new site will be looking at obviously the new accommodation, but I don't think I have anything to add to that at this stage.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions, comments? Councillor Colling.
Thank you. I don't really have any objections to this either, but just to kind of cover all our bases, I'm wondering if there have been any complaints from residents on any of the sections covered in the report?
Julia?
Through you, Chair, there's been no comments from third parties on this application. Is that, I hope that covers the question.
Sorry, I may not have been clear. I just meant over the course of the time that the depot has been in operation, have residents nearby made any complaints?
I'm not aware of any complaints that have been made, and our environmental health team have made a comment on this application, and usually they would advise if there had been any complaints made, but they haven't advised that, and they're happy with the application. So on that basis, I didn't see an issue with that.
Councillor Thornborough.
So can I just come back on my previous point? Can the officer just speak to us about the work conditions of the office workers in the porta cabins? They've been working in temporary porta cabins, and are they acceptable standards of office space for this duration of the temporary use and the further temporary use, or should improvements be considered? Thank you.
Julia, I'll ask Philippa to respond to that.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So, yes, these are temporary porta cabin structures, which we wouldn't usually like to see continuous renewals for applications for planning permissions. But we need to bear in mind that it's an existing situation, and this planning application relates to just continued use for a limited period of time while improved facilities are put into place. Now, we've heard from the case officer that there are a limited number of staff that use the site as a base, but we are led to understand that there are appropriate facilities for the staff, so we're comfortable that their well-being is provided for by the City Council as employer, and so we don't foresee that there's any issues that would restrict us unduly in supporting this application before us today.
I think the point has been well made, and the people who are responsible for bringing forward the new scheme are present, and I think they will have heard your voice, Councillor Thornborough, and make sure that future accommodation is suitable, create a suitable working environment in all heat conditions. Are there any other points? This is a very straightforward planning application. It's an unchanged scheme. It is essentially only extending a temporary use of the depot for a 3-year period from December 23 to December 26. It's likely that only about a year of that will used before the depot is relocated to its permanent site. In the consideration of this planning application, two new conditions have been attached relating to dust compliance and noise compliance. So are we ready to move to the vote on this particular application? Unless you want to say anything, Philippa. Yeah, you want to read it out and then I'll do that. Yeah,
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I could confirm the recommendation, which is set out on page 140 of your agenda. So we're granting planning permission for application 2201842 FUL, subject to conditions and informatives set out from section 12 onwards, but there is also an amendment to the recommendation in respect of condition 2, the temporary permission, which you'll find on your amendment sheet. I won't read it out in full, but it is as set out on your amendment sheet, with delegated authority to officers to carry out any minor changes. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll have a show of hands for those who want to approve this planning application.
It's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, speakers. No questions. And thank you very much for your patience in waiting for such a long time. Before we move to the next agenda item, we just need a short break, and we'll resume in a couple of minutes. Okay, thank you. I just want to introduce agenda item 6, land south of Fulbourn Road, Cambridge Planning Appeal, APP/W0530/W/22329805. The report contains information which the officer recommends should be exempt from publication under paragraph 5 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, and also that the public should be excluded during the committee's consideration of it. This is referenced on the agenda page and on the front sheet of the report. Does the committee agree that the public interest is outweighed by the recommendation to exclude the public for this agenda item? So, if members raise their hands to agree to go into an exempt session, could we take a vote on that, please? So, all of today's business which is to be conducted in public has been completed. Once the live screen has been ended, we shall not return to live streaming the committee because with the conclusion of item 6, today's committee's business will be completed. Please can I ask all members of the public to leave the council chamber? And please can the meeting producer end the live stream?